So the next topic of the session is the state of AI in retail industry. We have Vaibhav Vohra presenting this. So Vaibhav is head of products at Bossanova. He's an experienced product manager who is bringing in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and data science products to market. His cloud products have won multiple awards at SAP. Currently, he is working at the intersection of machine learning, AI, and data as a service. Thank you so much, Vaibhav. Over to you.
Thank you. It's great to be here as part of the Tech Mahindra AI Forum, along with Intel Capital. I think that what we really wanted to focus on for this session was getting into retail and what are some of the challenges and solutions of AI that are really coming to life. So as was mentioned earlier, Bossanova is a company that's sort of at the precipice of AI machine learning in the retail setting. And our journey is essentially to map the retail world. We want to map the retail world for every store, every product, and every day. And in retail, the big trend that we're seeing is this journey to customer experience. And that journey typically has involved, from an e-commerce perspective, an understanding of purchase decision making and what websites people have visited. But really, and especially recently, there's been a supreme focus on what's happening in the retail store itself, within the four corners of the store. So really, it's not just about clicks, it's about clicks and bricks, the combination of the two. So some of the most overused term in retail is omnichannel, but really what this is suggesting is that we need to focus on what's happening in the truth in the store to really drive the next generation of insights. So that's what we're really focused on, is transforming the shopping experience, enhancing customer experience, and with AI, we're able to do it at the level that we haven't been able to see before. So we've looked at this problem, globally from retail, and we've seen that there's almost $150 billion lost every year just in North America from not having accurate inventory data. So if you can imagine, having an out or an item not on a shelf, that's a $50 billion problem just by itself. And you look at some of these other problems, like pricing not matching on the storefront, so that the customer gets a very poor experience of having to explain at the cash register, this is what happened. These are huge problems. Also, not being able to find staff to help them, or the system said it was in stock, but you couldn't find it. These problems have been existing since the beginning of retail. So it's very interesting that until now there hasn't been really a strong way to look at solutions for something like this. And typically in retail, for those of you that are very familiar with the industry, oftentimes you know what's going on in the input, what items are entering a store, and then you have some idea of what items are exiting via point of sales. But what's happening in the inside is really where a lot of magic and to be honest, a lot of lack of clarity occurs. And that's what we're seeking to solve with AI. So again, $150 billion challenge, and AI will surely be the centerpiece of solving this. So we as Bossanova, we have a robot that you can see sort of at the middle. And the idea is that we have the ability to scan shelves and create 2D and 3D models of what's happening on the store floor. So we can say that, hey, this item is misplaced. We can collect truth data that hasn't been seen, and we can replicate this at a high degree of efficiency. And really, from a use case perspective, imagine a store associate who no longer has to scan every aisle and figure out what items are missing and can be directed to the right place at the right time. That's huge. And also, it leads to their efficiency, because then they can focus on real customer experience challenges, not just making sure that items are properly stocked. So what we enable is the ability to collect inventory data through our 15 cameras that's on the arm. And we can collect this data, process it very quickly, and send it down to an app. So that's one example use case of restocking. The other main use case is this idea of reordering. So imagine as a retailer, you have the ability to reorder items that are super high priority for you, that have high velocity, just by knowing what item's out of stock. Again, that's another example where AI from the data and insights generated by the robot can be married with data, the perpetual inventory data. There are other use cases that are super important. One is this ability for e-commerce, right? So in the e-commerce setting, there's a buy online, pick up in store approach that's being adopted very, very rapidly. The major challenge with that is, what if the item says it shows up online, but when you go to the store, it's not there? and the person who's trying to wheel out the shopping basket ends up missing an item. That's a terrible customer experience. So being able to offer substitutes at the time of purchase or as fast as possible, that's what's really important to retail. So really, what you begin to see is a lot of these in-store decision making being evolved, right, by this collection of data. Even at the distribution center, you can see those trucks that show up on the right side of the screen. What happens is items get sent from distribution centers, and they get sent to the back office of the retail store, or the back of the retail store, and then it has to be unloaded. So imagine a world where you could prioritize that based on what's happening in the store. So again, this is another example of how retail is really innovating itself, and it's all about efficiency with AI. So the collection of all these data and insights has really led to the next generation of store transformation. The inventory insights over the decades, this is true for all aspects of AI, whether it's in retail or otherwise. It doesn't occur overnight, right? There's a series of innovations and step changes in terms of retail, having punch cards and barcodes and RFID, and some of this technology is great for today. The big challenge is, it's generally, it can be invasive, right? From tagging and marking items. You want something that's truly autonomous, right? You want the ability to generate these insights continuously on every item and every day, and that's really where the evolution for inventory has really transformed over the last 100 years. So, Bossanova, having been around for not 100 years, we've similarly had an evolution in terms of how we've delivered AI. In 2014, the idea was, yes, we have this kind of ballpoint pen-looking robot that can deliver insights. We focused on safety. So oftentimes people get caught up in how the AI actually works in terms of learning and training, but really the delivery of the insight is also crucial. So the evolution for us was start with something very basic, nimble, that enables a decent user experience. But then when you begin to evolve your thinking and start looking at the business challenges, you for example say, hey, the items at the top of the shelf are super valuable. So for example, for planogram compliance, from a retail setting, it's very important for retailers and brands to have an excellent idea of this is what the store actually looks like versus their plan of the planogram. And retailers and brands are willing to pay more for having items that are in high activity areas. So that's another example of how this was evolved based on the business reality. The next, of course, in 2016 and 2019, where you get to currently, you begin to experience how AI actually works in the wild, right? This focus on autonomy and battery life. What we've basically built is a self-driving car in retail. And that's not easy, simply because you have to think about all these considerations of how humans will respond to it, and so forth. So, from starting with an initial business hypothesis to rolling it out at mass scale, it's clearly an evolution. And in retail, it's one of the hardest environments in the world, simply because of the number of people that move and dynamically interact with the environment every day. So if I were to offer some suggestions on how do you tackle AI in retail, or perhaps even more broadly, one of the constructs or frameworks that I like to talk about is the sensor to data to insight to action. So some of the older approach, and this is much along the vein of rapid prototyping, is you have a sensor, let's say in a retail setting, and you sort of understand how it works. You ask it to collect a whole bunch of data. You dump it to some data warehouse. It generates an insight that gets sent to a cloud, and you begin to look at it from a UI perspective. And then you sort of begin to query it and say, hey, at me as a business owner or data scientist, I might be interested in this data. So it's really this kind of waterfall, one-by-one approach. It's a little bit time consuming. You may realize at the end that, hey, the action that you were trying to drive, you don't have the sensor to do it. So what we're really looking at is how do you get these things out to market faster? And I think the key is start with the action. What problem are you looking to solve? So for example, for planogram compliance, the way we looked at it was, hey, this is a huge problem that you don't necessarily know the true blueprint of the store. How can we help build integrations to services, and what is the insight that's needed? So for example, is this shelf broken? Is this item misplaced? Or is this have a beam next to it? And then you turn that into how frequently you need the data, and then you back into what sensors you need. So this is an example of how we use this process to derive the right sensor, which is a robot. And I think it's important to note that you don't necessarily always go through this as a linear pathway. It's oftentimes an iterative process. So this is a little bit of a simplification. But where we arrived, as an example, was we had a challenge that hey, like in a retail setting, and for many retailers out there, the Wi-Fi can be extremely challenging. So what we did was we took some of the edge processing, and we're able to actually do all the processing that can occur in the cloud on this compute stack within the robot. So building to some of these edge cases has become super important as well. And so for retail, that's actually a critical challenge of designing to those edge cases, because not everything is going to go as planned. Whether it's here's how the labels look and the amount of training that's required, but it's simply the reaction to, hey, when you build to scale in retail, you've got to look at sensor data, action, and insights on every step of the journey. When you look at overall use cases, many of these we've talked about. I just wanted to remark on, not just for Bossanova, but also in retail, what are retailers kind of focusing on at a high level in terms of problems they want to solve with AI. And misplaced items is huge as well. Oftentimes items get misplaced or lost, and you don't know where it is. So being able to identify, because it could be months or weeks where high margin items are missing, and again leads to poor customer experience. AI, VR is huge, so the ability to stitch together a highly reliable panoramic image that you can then use for somebody to mimic an experience at home for what they would see in store. That's another example where AI is being used heavily. The number of facings, so this is, like, in retail there's this idea of a mod, and a mod is essentially the ability to see an item in a perfect way to how they envision it from a brand perspective. And so being able to see that, yes, this is how it's being set up every day, and correcting it and directing store associates to solve those problems is very important. And again, it's all about ROI, how this data can be used to really not just enhance customer experience, but also think about ways that for retail that you can enhance your overall ownership of your relationships with your suppliers and brands. Imagine being able to give all this data to your brands to say, hey, this is actually what's going on the store floor. This is exactly what it looks like. And these are the changes you should consider. I think that changes the supply chain or the value chain tremendously. So having that data and action and insights to be able to do this is super important. So this is actually my last slide in terms of what are the key takeaways over the last 13 to 14 minutes that we've talked about. I think that one of the big tweets that you can take away is, one, that actionable insights will continue to drive decisions, right? So really focus on insights and how that drives actions in the retail world. The second main takeaway that I would suggest is how AI can enhance customer experience by empowering associates. So the idea here is don't focus so much on just, hey, AI can transform and reduce labor. It's really about enabling associates to do great at what they love to do, which is connect with customers and overall increase their effectivity. In a retail environment, again, it's having worked in aerospace, having worked in banking and a number of verticals, I feel like the retail environment is super challenging, and you shouldn't necessarily expect success the first time out. So having an iterative process, especially with AI, is key. Human-robotic interaction, that's huge, right? Like, we did a ton of studies on, hey, how we wanted the robot to be extremely approachable, but also very very mission-driven. So we didn't want necessarily people to spend a lot of time trying to interact with the robot. We wanted people to accept it and be very functional. Designing for the complexity of the human world, I think it's very easy, as I mentioned earlier, just to focus on AI for AI's sake. But man, when you really get into the real environment, you got to think about all the edge cases, which is then tweet number 6. Design for the exceptions, not the rules. Focus on all the things that could go wrong to really build a robust system, whether it's building redundancy on the edge versus the cloud, or if it's taking data that you've trained on 2 years ago and adding to that data set. So that's it from my side. You can reach out to us at bossanova.com. Twitter handle is there as well. We'd love to help you guys in your journey for the retailers out there in terms of how to bring AI to life in an actionable way. And thank you again to Tech Mahindra and Intel Capital for having us here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vaibhav. That was a very interesting session. Many of us who were looking at the retail industry looked at how AI is transforming the customer-facing processes, especially the recommendation engines. But now AI is clearly disrupting the retail industry, looking at a lot more into the deeper processes across that ecosystem. Thank you again.